criticism of traditional RPG systems. Why loot-based RPGs are running out of steam. Modern video games still use mechanics that originated decades ago in tabletop games. The system of levels, characteristics, and random loot drops came from Dungeons and Dragons, where such elements served as a tool for resolving conflicts and calculating damage. However, since then, the industry has developed enormously, and approaches to gameplay design have changed, except for one thing: the loot-based leveling system. Games continue to rely on numbers, statistics, and drop swords and armor that differ in +2 to damage and +5 to endurance. As a result, player development boils down to mundane farming of experience and equipment. The question arises, where is the pleasure of real progress when leveling becomes a substitute for skill? The example of Dark Souls, farming versus skill. In the Dark Souls series, the player can always defeat the boss if they level up their character, but this does not require real skill growth. It is enough to run around locations, collect souls, and kill weak enemies. The internet is full of guides on how to farm effectively for progress. But this misses the point. The game becomes a routine rather than a challenge. Example: Sekiro, True Player Evolution. Sekiro takes the opposite approach. You don't upgrade your weapons or collect endless loot. You have one katana, and you play the entire game with it. New gadgets open up tactical possibilities, but they don't replace skill. Each enemy requires a different approach, and it is your gaming skills, timing, and study of combat that make you stronger. The 3 encounters with Genichiro, one of the main enemies, perfectly demonstrate this evolution. At first, he doesn't give you a chance, then the fight becomes equal, and in the end, you are already a master. All this is thanks not to level 35, but to the player's real progress. The Witcher and deceptive progress loot and levels instead of skill. In The Witcher 3, a similar level system makes enemies unavailable until you level up. Encountering a strong monster, such as a Lesh, at the beginning does not inspire a desire to improve, but rather a desire to simply come back later when you have the right level. The reason is not the player's skills, but the passive leveling up of numbers and gear. Strengths of The Witcher's RPG system. It is important to note that the RPG component can enrich the game. The character development tree system and the choice of combat style, signs, alchemy, sword, affect the gameplay. Also, the dialogues and moral choices really immerse you in the story, but the level and armor system creates artificial barriers that make the gameplay less organic. Fallout and the damage problem. In Fallout 4, even if you have a powerful rifle, you may not be able to kill a simple raider because their level is higher and your damage is insufficient. This undermines realism. A precise shot to the head does not work. The game ignores physics for the sake of numbers. It all comes down to math, where every encounter with an enemy requires calculations rather than an intuitive approach. This simplification makes the process more like Excel than an action game with survival elements. Enemy levels and artificial difficulty RPG fans might say, enemy levels are needed so players don't get into areas too early. But examples from other genres show that this can be done in a more natural way. In Metal Gear Solid 5, if the player constantly kills enemies with headshots, they start wearing helmets. This is realistic and logical. The enemy adapts. In Batman: Arkham Asylum, as the player progresses, enemies also evolve. They appear with night vision devices, making it more difficult to take them out. All of this happens without levels and numbers. The role of RPG systems is to enhance, not replace. It is not worth completely abandoning RPG mechanics. They work well where they complement gameplay rather than dominate it. If the player is given a choice of how to develop their character and different paths are opened up, it is interesting. But if the game requires grinding for the sake of grinding, it forces you to farm rather than play. Do we need digital grind? The gaming industry is capable of offering rich mechanics that engage the player without endless tables of characteristics. Level-based RPGs don't necessarily have to disappear, but it's time to abandon the overrated role of numbers in leveling up. especially when there are examples of excellent design where complexity is created not in tables, but at the level of combat, environment, and storyline design. Leveling up without numbers, an alternative is possible. Example: Shadow of the Colossus. This cult game has no traditional leveling up at all. Players are not given new armor or swords with improved characteristics. All game progress is emotional and tactical growth. By defeating Colossi, players learn to interact with their environment, recognize their enemies' weaknesses, and act more accurately. Isn't this a true RPG in the spirit of role-playing experience? Only instead of level 25 and agility bonuses, you gain experience as a player, as a person behind the screen. Example: Limbo, Inside, Pure Skill. Games without an interface, without inventory, without an upgrade system. You don't get a +3 jump module or 7th level gravity pants. Instead, you go through a series of challenges yourself, developing in the process. These games show that atmosphere, challenge, and design can immerse the player just as well as a leveling table. Psychology and the deceptive sense of progress. Why do numbers work? Players love the feeling of growth. When you start the game with 100 health and end with 1500, your brain gets a dopamine rush. It feels good. However, it's important to understand that this is an illusion of progress. If at the beginning the enemy deals 20 damage to you with 100 HP, and at the end, 300 damage to you with 1500 HP, the balance does not change. All that has changed are the numbers. Such progress is fiction, not the result of effort, but the result of accumulating numbers, created solely for self-deception. When leveling up gets in the way, if it becomes easier for the player not because they have become smarter, but because they have a legendary breastplate plus 50% defense, then the gameplay loses its interactivity. You are not solving the problem, you are jumping over it. This causes a fatigue effect. Everything seems to be improving, but there is no challenge. And without a challenge, there is no satisfaction. Games as calculators, when numbers become a curse. Build paranoia, when gameplay turns into an Excel spreadsheet. In games such as Path of Exile or Diablo, players spend hours not playing the game but on forums and calculators, trying to optimally distribute skill points. This isn't bad in itself, it's a separate type of enjoyment, similar to game theory or chess. But the problem is that such mechanics are migrating to games where they are inappropriate. For example, in action RPGs like Horizon Zero Dawn, where the combat mechanics and visual style distract from the numbers, but nevertheless, leveling up through weapons and levels shifts the focus from battles to grinding. What can be changed? Hybrid approaches, fewer numbers, more gameplay. The ideal path is not to completely abandon leveling up, but to shift the emphasis to skills and player choice. Let new skills give not +15 to critical damage, but unique mechanics that need to be mastered. Examples: Ghost of Tsushima, leveling up unlocks new fighting stances that change the style of combat. The Last of Us. Part 2. New skills give you an advantage, but you are still vulnerable. There is no complete imbalance. How to make leveling up interesting. Here's a simple formula: skill greater than stats, player decision greater than number, impact on the world greater than +5 to dexterity. Example: in the game, the player can learn to recognize smells from tracks. This gives a tactical advantage but is not displayed as +10 to intuition. This immerses you in the world, not in a table. RPGs without levels? Myth or future? In fact, RPGs can exist without levels. Examples: Undertale. You are judged by your moral choices, not your strength. Disco Elysium. Your characteristics affect perception, not striking power. Death Stranding. Player development does not come through leveling up, but through mastering routes, logistics, and strategy. This proves that engagement and interest do not depend on numbers. They depend on narrative, interaction with the world, and depth of choice. What do we really want from games? We want to feel that we have become better, not the character, but ourselves, so that looking back we can understand, I didn't just open chests and press buttons. I learned, made mistakes, replayed, and won. Numbers, levels, and gear are just tools, but if the entire gameplay is tied to them, the game turns into a race for virtual statistics rather than a hero's journey. Online RPGs and the eternal grind MMORPGs, the formula of leveling up for the sake of leveling up. In games such as World of Warcraft, Black Desert, Lineage 2, and others, the entire structure of the game is built around endless progression. The longer you play, the stronger you become. However, this is not because you have become smarter or more attentive. It is because you have simply killed more mobs, collected more resources, and opened more chests. This creates the effect of an eternal unfinished task. The player returns to complete the gestalt, not because the gameplay is interesting in itself. Burnout mechanics. When a game ceases to be a game, such projects often mask boredom as content. You kill 1,000 wolves to get a 0.1% chance of dropping a legendary helmet. Sooner or later, the gamer stops feeling emotions, turning into a mouse button presser. Developers use seasonal events, battle passes, daily quests, and experience caps to make the player feel obligated to play. It is no longer a pleasure but a duty, like a second job. How can you reformat leveling? 1. Focus on behavior, not levels. Imagine a game with no levels. Instead, the world reacts to you. If you often eliminate enemies stealthily, people start to fear you. Doors close in front of you, but you receive more contracts from mercenaries. If you are prone to destruction, NPCs will avoid you, but cities will open up access to underground weapons dealers. The player does not receive numbers, they receive consequences. This is what leveling up is, not plus 10 to stealth, but the emergence of new paths in the plot and the world. 2. Gaming habits shape your build. Let's say you often parry blows. Over time, your character begins to read enemy attacks better, reflexively blocking even unfamiliar blows. Or conversely, you strike at random, and your hero gradually loses accuracy, even if you find better weapons. In this way, the game adapts to your style, turning your habits into strengths or weaknesses. 3. Reverse leveling. Degradation. Why not make a game where players lose skills if they don't use them? For example, stopped using hacking, complex locks become insurmountable, stopped studying new plants. Alchemy starts to fail. This requires planning, creates depth, and makes choices more meaningful. You can't level up everything. You have to make sacrifices. The concept of the perfect RPG. Imagine a game, the world, a post-apocalyptic city where civilization has fallen, but clans, settlements, and abandoned technology remain. The main character, nobody, no level, no weapons, only their own hands and intellect. Leveling up, completely tied to decision-making. You cooperated with technocrats and gained access to their archives, but the marauders began to consider you a traitor. You saved a village and the residents began to heal you along the way, but your reputation as a dangerous fighter declined. Combat, based on skill. Everything depends on timing, positioning, and improvisation. Development, not XP, but trust, influence, and network of contacts. The wider your network, the more opportunities you have. Inventory, not infinite. One slot equals one item. You have to think about what is more important, provisions, explosives, or a piece of data. RPG as a path to self-discovery. This approach makes the game more than just an RPG. It is a path through choices, through moral dilemmas, where you shape not your level but your own character. After all, the real role-playing experience is not, I killed 500 enemies and now I am stronger, but rather, I saved a person I could have killed. Now he has led me to another. This person has changed everything. I feel like I did the right thing, or maybe I was wrong. Let the numbers stay in the background. RPG is not a genre about stats, but about the role we play. Statistics can be a convenient mechanic, but they should not be the essence. The most valuable thing in games is experience, memories, and emotions.